Whispering Woods recently renovated an old stone barn on the property to give a new home to the few sheep, pigs, Highland cattle, and donkey that had been left behind. The petting zoo is a much bigger hit than anyone expected, and Genevieve is excited to make it even more of an attraction. To round out the animal selection, she plans to introduce some alpacas and goats as well as another friend for Dahlia the donkey. With the zoo growing, more staff have been hired to join Imogen, Antonio, and Wesley, and Jonathan Vaughn is becoming a little antsy about the zoo's funds. What roadblocks might the zoo hit today? Only one way to find out. Welcome back to Whispering Woods Wildlife Haven. Hey everyone, Sparrow here. As you can probably tell from my voice right now and from the intro, my voice is still a little bit croaky, crackly, crunchy, whatever you want to call it. So I do apologize for that, but we are getting slightly better. Today we're going to start off with a little bit of animal management because as you can see, we have a lot of sheep and also pigs. They are very prolific breeders. And our donkey, Dahlia, is not super happy with the amount of space she has in her enclosure at the moment. So I'm going to rename all of the sheep. As you can see, the first generation is getting an A, and then all of their offspring are going to get a B. And this is just a way of helping me track which generation we're on, as well as the parents. For sheep, because there's only one male and multiple females, all of the offspring will be related, so there's really no point of doing like B1, B2 for different litters. So we're just going to keep it all B across the board, and then we'll know which ones can't be bred together. I'm also going to add keep to the 2 males that I want to keep, obviously, and then once the rest of them die out or we have traded them off, then those will be the start of our next generation. We'll just have to buy up some new females to put into the enclosure with them. So the reason why I'm keeping those 2 specifically is they are our highest rated genetically. So we're just going to keep them in there, eventually hopefully get slightly higher stats for the next generation. And here I'm just going to double check which ones I think we can release. Well, not release. We can't actually release these animals because they're domestic animals, but we can rehome them. And I think that's what we're going to do just so that we can give Dahlia a little bit more space. And then also just hold on to the initial females because they may as well just live out their days here at the Wildlife Haven. Slightly better for space. I am going to rearrange this paddock a little bit, make it slightly larger afterwards. But first, let's look at our Highland cattle. So they're fine on space. I think they're fine on numbers too, just nutrition was a little bit low. And then we'll just have to add our A's and B's to those ones as well. I think we only have 4 of them in here. Oh, 5 at the moment, which is nice. We have 2 juveniles and then we have our male and our female. Just adding some contraceptives to the young ones because we don't want the father or the mothers breeding with their own offspring. So we're just going to keep them on contraceptives until the older generation dies out, and then we can decide which one we're going to keep after. This one, I already have one that I'm keeping. I've put them in the trade center. They are a gold rated animal, so we're going to keep them. We'll eventually get some females to go along with him. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful for you if you're having trouble tracking your own animals. I always just like to put the letters. Sometimes I'll use numbers. If there's 2 generations that are mixing, like an A and a B, then their child will also get an AB. And then that way it's a lot easier at a glance to see which ones can be bred together and which ones absolutely shouldn't be. We do want to have a friend for Dahlia. It looks like she has enough room now. Still going to expand the paddock a little bit afterwards, but it also looks like we do not have any donkeys on the market, so that's gonna have to wait until later. That's okay though. It'll happen eventually. For now, we're going to focus on this spot back here behind the pig enclosure. So just going to even out the terrain, don't want it to be super hilly. Back here, we're going to be adding our new animals, the alpine goat and the alpaca, as well as a little farmer's market or seating area plaza thing for our guests. we're just going to have a few stalls here, and that will be right at the end of the video, so I will make sure to have a timestamp for that if that's what you're interested in watching. For those of you who don't yet know, to make a plaza, I always like to use the align to grid option. It allows you to create paths without the weird gaps in between. And then here I'm just clicking on the corner, and then that way it expands out into the rest of it. However, I wasn't really a fan of the wood path, so we're going to get rid of that, and we'll just have this kind of right angle here. I think I end up making it all dirt anyway later. Sometimes you have to try a few things before you settle on what you actually want to happen. So the animals we are adding today, we are going to start off with the alpine goat. And we can have quite a few of them in an enclosure, but only one male. We're gonna zone it for about 10 goats. They are very prolific breeders like the sheep and the pigs, so we want to make sure that they have lots of room. However, I do want to have a little gimmick with this enclosure that is inspired entirely by my local corn maze. So at the corn maze, there is a petting zoo, and the goats have 2 enclosures that go over a path, so kind of what we're trying to do here. So there's one on the left and one on the right, and then joining them, there's a bridge over the guest path, and it is called the Golden Goat Bridge. And I thought that was hilarious. So that's basically exactly what we're going to be building here throughout the video. So this is the path that will be going underneath the bridge, and it will also lead the staff into the building for the goats and our alpacas, which is the next animal we'll be adding. And these guys can live in pretty big herds as well. They're very social animals, but they can have more than one male, which is great. Normally animals can only have one male and then a whole harem of females. Alpacas can have a lot of both, which is really, really nice. And they also come in a bunch of color variations, so hopefully we can find a few different ones, and then they'll be able to breed into a whole bunch of other color variations. A much larger enclosure for this one. And we're going to make this an alpaca orchard, as you can probably tell by the title of this video. We are entering the speed build portion of our video. The stone barn for the alpaca and goat enclosures, I wanted to be slightly different from the stone barn we built last time, mostly just because I didn't want you to get bored and just see me building the same thing all over again. So instead of the European rustic stone, we're going to use the Indonesian temple brick, and I did recolor it so that it matched the stone to some extent. So it's a little bit lighter. It does still have the darker grunge on it. And then the flooring, we're going to use the Arctic pack because I've had my mechanic research that, and I thought it was a nice contrast to the light walls to have that darker wood down there. The doors we're going to borrow from the barn that we built last time. These are also just the Indonesian stained timber pieces, and we're going to keep that light wood trim around the edges, as well as the green accents all over the place, because I still thought they looked good with the darker flooring. A little bit too perfectionistic here, but it is what it is. We are also going to have some beams going across the building once more on both the taller alpaca building and the shorter goat backstage. For the roof, the twilight shingles is what I decided to use this time around, and we're going to recolor these to a green color as well. I tried doing this roof at least 3 separate times, and this was the one that finally ended up working. I just wasn't the biggest fan of the painted slate. I love the regular slate, and I've used the painted slate a lot in TNS, but it was not working for what I wanted here. It looked way too... There was just way too much going on alongside the Indonesian temple brick. We're gonna end up with the twilight shingles. And here is a very good lesson in group management, because I forgot to take the roof into a new group when I started building it, so I had to go back and select all of the pieces to make sure that I could lift it up off of the building afterwards. Here I'm going to extend the eave because I wanted it to extend slightly further over the wall. The wall is on the outside of the grid line, so anytime you build something on the outside of the grid line, you have to extend whatever is above it even further usually to make it look realistic, and then just lining that up with the edge. This is the side building for the goats, so the roof is going to be a little bit lower. I ended up using the shingle panels, which are a fantastic piece. Honestly, anything that's off the grid is maybe not my favorite piece, but it works so well. It's so much more customizable. It can also be more overwhelming, especially if you're a new player. If you feel like you have a good handle on grid pieces, then I would highly recommend checking out non-grid pieces because you can make things a lot more custom that way. Because this roof is at like a 7-degree angle maybe, and then I'm just lining the edges with the Indonesian stained timber to match the other roof. And then this little bit I'm gonna fill in with some plaster pieces because the brick pieces don't really have a slope that matches this roof, seeing as it's custom, but I didn't want it to be open to the elements. Also going to place some windows on the building so that it looks a little bit more lived in. And then we're going to create another hayloft, is what I learned this is called. So the area above the barn where a bunch of things are stored is called a hayloft. And again, just like last time, I'm making this patchwork of Indonesian stained timber panels. And then once I had one side, I copied it over to the other side, and we're just gonna fill in this middle section with a hole in the middle so that we can put a ladder through it, and that is going to be how staff would access the hayloft if they needed to. Obviously in Planet Zoo they won't actually be able to, but that's okay. The roof this time around was so annoying because, as you could see from the outside, it was kind of irregular and there were a lot of slopes. On the inside, when I was trying to do the beams, it was just so annoying. All of them had to basically be hand placed. I couldn't just copy and paste them. It was very annoying, but I am happy with the way it turned out, so it was worth it. Still very annoying. As long as I had one on each face, I think it ended up working okay. On the back of the building, or the side depending on how you look at it, we're going to add a small shed-like entryway, I guess you could call it. The roof will be even lower for this little section. And then this is how the staff will be able to access the goat backstage. You can imagine that there would be maybe a few pails in there, maybe a crate or two, just something super simple. And I placed the shingles the wrong way around the first time, so I had to redo that little bit there. Also, of course, going to line this tiny little piece of roof with some more Indonesian timber as well, just to make sure that it matches the rest of the building. And once this is done, we'll have the entire backstage building complete, minus the interior, of course, but we're not going to spend very much time on that today, seeing as it's very similar to the other building, using the same fences as the sheep and Highland cattle enclosures. Had some issues finding this door. I always think of it as a cottage door for some reason, but it's actually called an old door. So make sure you search old if you're looking for this door specifically. Now that that's done, we're going to move on to some fencing. You might recognize this fence from the sheep and donkey enclosure last time. I don't know why I was doing it one little bit at a time before realizing that, hey, you can do this quite a few pieces at a time. That's just the perfectionism coming through. And I think you'll see that on a few of these joins because I was just so particular about where this fence is supposed to go and how it's supposed to join on to the next fence and what angle it's supposed to be at and all of this stuff. And I swear that if I wasn't like this, it would be a lot easier to build enclosures and it wouldn't take me 8 to 10 hours to do something simple like this. Also, kind of hate that once you're building off the grid, it's difficult to slide multiple pieces across at the same time. That's why I did each of those separately, because otherwise they just didn't want to move along the same axis. Which is weird because they're all the same piece and they're all pointing in the same direction. Like I didn't even rotate them. Yeah, I don't know. I should have continued building on the grid and then rotated everything into place, but it is what it is. And then of course, just having to join up the path there, I forgot that the gate needed a little bit of breathing room in front of it. So I ended up having to move everything back about a fence length, which worked out really perfectly. So you can see me here trying to line up that fence to the existing fence, and then it worked out perfectly. So it was great. Here we're going to outline the goat enclosure. I think I end up making that side of the alpaca enclosure also this stone fence, just so that we're not doubling up on the fences. And then the rest of the goat enclosure is going to be that same metal fence as the Highland cattle enclosure. I couldn't get the path to actually go through that doorway, so staff kind of just walked through that wall, but that's okay. So here's that metal fence. I do really love this metal fence. If there is any reason to get the Barnyard DLC, I would say that these fences are one of those reasons. Across the pathway, we're going to build the second enclosure so that we can build our goat bridge over the pathway afterwards. That was a task and a half, and you are about to see exactly how long that took. Our first goats are arriving. These guys are so cute. I think they're one of my favorite animals in the pack. But as you can see, they obviously do not have enough room on just this one side of the enclosure. Unfortunately, because this is the only side that the zookeepers will be able to access, we have to make sure that we squish in all of the food, water, and food enrichment items into this side. Bad planning on my part because I made this side smaller than the other. That's okay, we'll make it work. This water pump here is a blueprint from the Steam Workshop by Raichu Plays. Highly recommend checking out their YouTube channel as well as their workshop. I saw that in one of their videos and knew I had to put it in somewhere in the zoo. And we are finally going to get started on our goat bridge. So once again, using Indonesian stained timber, we're going to make this a nice light brown color to match the trim on the building. And also just adding elements of realism, like making sure that there's a support underneath. And this is going to rise about 2 meters above the pathway. I tried to use the archer to measure it, and then I just ended up moving it downwards so that I wouldn't have to use extra pieces, because sometimes it was like not even a quarter of a meter off of the ground. So I just ended up sinking things lower as I continued to build. I did want to make this a little bit asymmetrical, but then with the way the planks work and trying to make it all line up, it was just too much effort. A lot of these planks are, unfortunately, very symmetrical, but at least it works. And you will see a little bit of trial and error here, which I think is always important to show. So there we go. Here I'm putting it on a diagonal, but then in order to get a bridge from this lower platform up to the higher platform, I had to get these beams at a really weird angle that would have been very annoying to actually make work. And I didn't even know if they were wide enough for the goats to walk across. So I will just end up using these planks once more, angling them downwards. Yeah, like that just, it doesn't work. would be so annoying to figure out. So we're just going to build a little bridge like this one up to the platform. Decide that maybe right angles are not all that bad. So yeah, that's not touching the ground, which means that I'm going to end up sticking everything down slightly lower just so I can avoid adding another piece on the end. And then we just have to make sure that the goats can actually get up there. Unfortunately, they cannot get up there, which means that we had to double up these bridges, which does give a much more robust feel to the climbing structure that I don't necessarily hate, but it would have been nice to have a little bit of variation between the plank sizes. So once I copied that across to the other side, I ended up using some mesh and some more beams around this top area, as well as the 2 descending planks on either side, to make sure that the goats can't just jump off of the bridge and escape their enclosure. It did take a little bit of fiddling around because for some reason they could still jump off of a different platform onto the ground, so I had to restructure that far side so that the platform was a little bit further away from the fence, but it does end up working, and I do think it looks quite good. I'm very, very happy that this worked, and I'm glad I didn't just spend like an hour and a half building this for it to just crash and burn. That would always suck. And there we go. They finally cannot escape their enclosure, including the goat bridge. We're going to add some more enrichment items on this side, mostly toy enrichment. I'm kind of sad that they can't jump onto these tires. I've seen a lot of things like this in goat enclosures and petting zoos where there's just tires sticking up out of the ground and then they'll hop across them to get up to other platforms. Using some more tires around the rubbing pillar. And we have baby goats already. Look at them. They are so cute. And thankfully, they also cannot escape the enclosure anywhere, because sometimes baby animals can escape the enclosure in ways that adults couldn't because their hitbox sizes are smaller. So when you have baby animals, make sure to double check that they cannot get out of their enclosure. Going to spam some foliage, of course, as usual. Lots of creosote, some dead trees, the saltport, although I try to use that sparingly because it does take up traversable area. And then obviously nettles and hostas and, you know, buffalo grass, the things that we usually put in. And then some decals. Finally, we are on to our alpacas. The first thing I needed to do was make sure that I had an apple tree, which is not really something we have in game. And I went across so many trees trying to figure out which one would work the best. And it was between the beech tree, the Brazilian nut sapling, and the custard apple tree. And I ended up using the Brazilian nut tree. So the reason why I used this one, even though the leaf shape is not what I wanted necessarily, is because it was the shortest and I thought it showed off the apples really well. So these apples, you could see I had one of the Arctic baubles recolored red. The Arctic bauble was a little bit too big for my liking, so I decided to make apples out of egg pieces. Just rotated them slightly, and then I think there's 8 egg pieces in each apple. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep, 8. Which means that each apple costs $120 in game. Multiplied by however many trees are in here. That's a lot of money. Because we have so much money from the butterflies that I'm like, I don't know how to spend this at the moment. So I guess these apple trees is what's gonna take up most of our budget. And these apple trees, I did make 3 different versions. So the first one is the fewest apples. The second one is an average amount of apples. And then the third one is a lot of apples. So they're quite similar, but also, and we can have a little bit of variety in there. Gonna add some terrain painting. For the most part, I kept the orchard grass, and then I put long grass down around the base of each tree, and then put in some soil and sand where I thought people would be walking most often, or where the alpacas might want to spend most of their time. This is probably one of my favorite builds so far. I thought it was so much fun just getting to be creative with some of the smaller pieces. That is one of my favorite things in the game. Going to pretty things up with some planters outside, and then of course spam a bunch of buffalo grass to make it look nice and lush. So enjoy while I rest my voice for just a tiny bit. We're going to build a tiny farmer's market. It's not really a farmer's market, but I wanted the stalls to sell things that could maybe be made from products grown or harvested in the petting zoo. So here we have cosmic cow milkshakes because, I mean, we have cows, we have goats. We could technically be making our own ice cream in the zoo, and we could be selling it right here. So this counter would be selling more so dairy products, and then another one that I have yet to research, but it will be in the final version, is the Pip Shot juice, because we will be growing apples and you can make apple juice out of those. We might be growing some other things. Stick around for next episode to see some of those. As for food, we're going to do the Monsieur Fruits because we might be growing some potatoes, and the pizza pen because, again, dairy products, which I can't have because I'm lactose intolerant, but I like the idea. So I really tried to pick shops that would fit the idea behind a farmer's market. Not that we really have many shops to choose from. We do have quite a few. And then around the counter, I built this wooden, rustic looking shell. Again, Indonesian stained timber because it's just what I love right now. As well as the Indonesian thatch roof. I thought this looked really good of all the roofs I tried. And it was also one of the smaller ones, which means that it fit. Behind each stall, I'm going to have a few shelves and just decorate it up a little bit. Make it look a little bit more rustic, I guess, even though we're using plastic pails here. I did end up making a crate full of potatoes for the fries, a stall. And then, to fill up the plaza, I'm going to add some benches and picnic tables, but I don't love the rustic themed benches from the new pack. I do like the straw, I like the idea of the flannel, but I don't like that you can't recolor it. So I ended up making my own bench, and thank you once again to Beeve for this idea because he's constantly sending me things and they always look so good. So this is an aquatic bench hidden within 2 rustic barrels, and people will be able to sit on these barrels. Glad that that ended up working. They do sink into them quite a bit, but I just like the idea of being able to sit on these barrels, so that's what we're gonna have. And then all around, just going to decorate with all of the rustic items, as well as some of the East Asia items. I think they work really well, along with the barrels and the crates and the pails and whatever else. And then the gingham umbrellas, I do also really like. We're just gonna recolor those to the Whispering Woods green colors. That'll be our seating area. The last thing I'm going to do is add some education. I haven't used the speakers yet in the zoo, but you can recolor them, and I'm gonna hide it in the goat bridge right here. So that is it for today. Here's a final shot of the goat bridge. Hopefully we get a goat walking over it for a little bit. Of course it's raining once again, because what else would it be doing in the British countryside? But I do hope that you enjoyed this episode. Please let me know what your favorite part of the build was. I do try to read all the comments and make sure that I'm structuring videos in a way that is exciting for you guys. If there's anything you would like to add to the zoo, please do also let me know in the comments. This is a collaborative zoo, so I will be taking all comments into account and trying to structure the story around them. There is one last animal from the new DLC to add, as well as a corn maze perhaps next time. And no one has guessed what is going behind the Highland cattle, but that will be coming up next episode. Here is one last shot of our apple orchard with the alpaca. that's all for now, and I will see you next time. Bye.